Okay, here we go. So this is the first tutorial in a series of probably, it'll probably end up being 5 or 6 on the basics of Fusion. The goal for these, for y'all, is to be short, succinct, to the point, and then essentially giving you the framework that you need to start doing things so that you can start asking questions. With a software package like Fusion, or really any CAD software package, I can't tell you everything that you need to know. You're gonna have to stumble through it and draw some stuff and go, well, what the heck? And a lot of it comes down to problem solving. But okay, well, that's 40 seconds gone. So let's go ahead and move into Fusion. So this is Fusion. This is your main screen here. But I'm going to start with file management because Fusion is cloud-based. So you're not going to be pulling files from your desktop or anything like that. Everything is done up through here. You can see I have a lot of projects, working on a lot of things. And I can create a project by clicking New Project. Right? Now, a project can have multiple files inside of it, right? So if I go to some of my more complicated ones, you can see where I've actually got, where's Macula? I have a whole bunch of actual files inside this, circuit boards and things that I use to make jigs. I have production file with my production versions. So it says project, but it's really just like a folder, an all-encompassing folder, because inside this project, now that we have our untitled document, when you save, you're picking the location and then you pick the project. So we're going to save this as tutorial, and we're going to save this as part 1. I think for most of you guys, file management is probably something that you're very familiar with and you understand. Speaking specifically to you, Mr. Aaron, and your, I'm sure your labyrinth of solid state drives and video folders and everything that you've got. So now that I've got this part and I've got it saved, we can go ahead and close this. By the way, you can create folders in here if I wanted to sort documents, right? And then just an FYI, if you right click on something, that's where your rename, move, copy, delete, and stuff like that is. It's a little it's very cumbersome, in my opinion. It's gotten better, but it's still a little slow. Pardon, we'll see. So let's go ahead and jump into navigation. So this, I will call it the view block, but I want to start up here at the top. This is, you'll see this in every single 3D design software. You'll see this in Blender. You'll see it wherever. It is your, it's essentially a shortcut panel, right? If I want to see the front, I want the front. If I want to click here, the top, the arrows take you to the next side of the block because we are in 3D. We have X, Y, and Z. You can see that. I can look at the angles. If I click on the edge of top and front, this is really useful for lining things up. And if you have multiple objects that you're lining up, but really it's just a good way to be able to see what you want to see quickly. And you can always hit home, and that will return you to your home view. That's very useful. Now you see that I've got a grid. I could turn that grid on or off under here, layout grid, and I could turn layout grid lock on. I don't ever really touch that, but sometimes I do toggle the grid, and you'll see why I keep the lock on. It's not as restrictive as maybe like a lock like you're thinking, but we'll get into that. You can change the grid settings, viewports and stuff. I don't use a lot of that. I think if you've ever used an old like G-Max, 3ds Max back in the day, it would start, you'd open your program and it would look like this, where you have your your front, your top, your 3D, and your right. It's not as common, and at least that's how it was when I was using G-Max back, making mods for the Sims 2 or whatever. But we could do single view, so if you ever end up there, that's where that is. All right, let's keep moving. So besides using this block, I can move around and I can navigate this 3D space using my mouse. I consider a mouse with a scroll wheel to be absolutely necessary. Aaron, I'm talking to you. So go get your mouse. Go dig it out of your bag. You're not going to trackpad this, because the mouse is responsible for 3 main commands: zoom, pan, and rotate. Zooming is, if you've ever played an RTS, any kind of video game, this is going to be very familiar to you. Zoom in, zoom out, and then if you hold the mouse button, you could pan the scroll wheel. Sorry, and then if you hold the scroll wheel and shift, Aaron, I don't know if this is the same on Mac. I would assume so. Hold shift, hold there. Now you can see that I can rotate around. Now, this is why the home button is useful, because you notice I'm upside down here. If you hit this, well, you could tell because I'm looking at the bottom. Boom, right back home. Always remember that. If you're not used to moving around in 3D space, it's going to take you a second to get used to. Eventually, you'll get good enough at it. But if you can't view and look and see what you're working on, then you're going to get frustrated. So take some time to get used to that. All right, let's talk about the tabs, the interface here. Up here you have, I'm not going to read them to you, solid, surface, mesh, yada, 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 yada. The one we're focused on is solid. Surface modeling, I don't do any of. It's just not how I work. I work more in solid body modeling. Mesh, if any of you guys get into, I don't even know if this is available in the free version. I assume that it's STL editing and mesh editing and stuff like that. We're here so that we can create our own files and turn them into meshes to print. We're not here so that we can edit other people's meshes. That's a pain in the butt. Sheet metal, if anybody wants to learn sheet metal, holler. I use that a lot for work. You probably can find better tutorials elsewhere though, but if you want a basic rundown, I don't know if it's available in the free version, but this is really good if you want to like design some sheet metal stuff, for the house, and then order it on SendCutSend or whatever. Plastic, you got to pay for. Utilities. If we talk about electronics, we'll talk about this a lot with bill of materials and stuff, but it's not so useful here. Manage, and apparently that's a plug-in too, whatever. Okay, solid. So focusing on the solid here, you have create, modify, assemble, configure, construct, inspect, insert, Really the ones we need to worry about are insert, inspect, construct. We'll talk about assemble, maybe, modify, create. So really 1, 2, 3, and then an optional 4 here. Construct planes are really cool. We'll talk about that later. Let's see where we're at here. 7 minutes. All right, I got to hustle. Got to keep it under 10. Create is self-explanatory. You are creating bodies. We'll get into what we create those bodies from. This is not your first Blender tutorial. We're not gonna create a donut and say that we've done something, because the next tutorial is going to be entirely about sketching, 2D sketches. That's what we're going to focus on next. And then from those sketches, we're going to create. And then once we've created something, we can modify it. Fillet, chamfers, fillet, I don't know. Chamfer, shell, draft, scaling, et cetera, et cetera. Really the only thing about that I want to talk about in assemble is the new component button. When you create bodies, when you create things, everything is going to show up over here. It's all organized on this tab. It doesn't make sense to show you this until there's actually some things in here, and then the timeline is down here. It doesn't make sense to show you that until we actually have things in the timeline. But everything that you're going to create is going to show up here on this left-hand side, and it's going to show up in the timeline. Again, once we start creating, we'll start talking about it, because it's pretty abstract if you've never done it before. But it's really simple. Once you do it, you go, oh, there we go. That makes sense. So anyway, back to components. So the only thing I want to show you guys is the components. If you have a document where you have more than one body, let's say you've got 2 versions of something or 3 versions of something or 2 pieces that fit together, I really recommend you go ahead and get into the habit of creating a new component. So you open your file, tutorial part 1. The first thing I'm going to do is kind of click new component, and I'm going to name it whatever, component 1. And then I'm going to create a second component, component 2. I really recommend getting into the habit of, oops, you see that? Under component 1 is component 2. What this does, I didn't mean to show you that. What this does is it allows you to nest. See the little button there? I can select the component. This is really useful. I'm going to go ahead and use one of my things just to show you, because I'm trying to keep everything under 10 minutes. We're at 10 minutes. Okay, well, I'm going to stop it there, and we will go ahead and dig right into sketches in tutorial number 2.